Now I'll tell you what's really going to happen, Singh. You sign this damn paper, you walk away with nothing, and that's the end of our story.
The garage was my sanctuary at 3 in the morning, the only place in Stillwater where a man could think without interruption. I was elbow deep in the engine of my '72 Camaro, trying to ignore the drunken cackling drifting from our kitchen window, when Danny's voice cut through the Maine night air like a rusty blade. "Jack's so pathetic," she slurred to her girlfriends. "If he knew I'd been screwing around with 5 different guys over the past 3 years, he'd still be too weak to leave me. The man's got no spine whatsoever." The laughter that followed was like nails on a chalkboard. Lisa's distinctive snort laugh, Tara's high-pitched giggle, and my wife's triumphant cackle created a symphony of betrayal that froze my blood. I straightened up slowly, wiping grease from my hands with a rag that suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Through the kitchen window, I could see them clearly. 3 women in their late 30s, wine glasses raised in mock celebration of my supposed weakness. "Remember that time he caught me texting Vince at 2 a.m.? Danny continued, her voice carrying perfectly in the still night. "I told him it was about real estate, and he actually believed me. The man's dumber than a box of rocks." More laughter, more wine being poured, more of my life being dissected for their entertainment. I'd suspected something was off for months. The late-night client meetings, the sudden interest in yoga classes that somehow required designer workout clothes. The way she'd started guarding her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes. But hearing it confirmed in such brutal detail was like taking a sledgehammer to the chest. "Who was the best?" Lisa asked, her words slurring together. "Come on, rank them." "Oh, that's easy," Danny replied without hesitation. "Vince is definitely the most talented. That man knows what he's doing. Then there's Pete from the town council. Married guys always try harder, you know? Dr. Sam's got stamina but no creativity. The other 2 were just for fun." I closed the Camaro's hood with deliberate care, the metallic clang echoing in the garage. 22 years of marriage. 22 years of thinking I'd married the love of my life. 22 years of being played for a fool. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. It teaches you patience. It teaches you to observe. And most importantly, it teaches you that the best revenge is the kind nobody sees coming. I walked into the house through the back door, my work boots heavy on the kitchen tiles. The 3 women looked up at me with varying degrees of guilt and surprise. Danny's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Jack, I didn't hear you come in," she said, her voice suddenly steady despite the wine. "We were just having girl talk." "I heard," I said simply, meeting her eyes. Every word. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Tara suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. But Danny straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in defiance. "Well, then you know where we stand," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You're not going anywhere, Jack. You never have the guts to leave, and we both know it." I nodded slowly as if considering her words. "You're absolutely right, Danny. I don't have the guts to leave." Relief flickered across her face. "But I do have the guts to make you wish you'd never been born." I turned and walked upstairs to our bedroom, leaving the 3 women in stunned silence. I had work to do, and not much time to do it. By morning, the locks were changed, the joint bank account was emptied, and Danny's belongings were packed in garbage bags on the front porch. The only thing I left her was her cell phone and a handwritten note. "You're right. I'm weak, but I'm not stupid. Game on." When she came home from her emergency sleepover at Lisa's house, she found me sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee, watching her try to process what had happened. "You can't do this," she screamed, pulling at the locked front door. "This is my house, too." "Was," I corrected, taking a sip of coffee. "Check the deed. Turns out when you're too busy screwing half the town to pay attention to paperwork, you miss important details. Like how the house was never put in both our names." Her face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "You fool! I'll take you for everything you're worth." "With what lawyer?" I asked calmly. "You'll need money for that. Good luck accessing any of our accounts." That's when she tried to punch me. I simply stepped aside and watched her stumble into the porch railing. Mrs. Rose, our elderly neighbor, was conveniently watering her flowers and witnessed the entire exchange. "Morning, Mrs. Rose," I called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Sure is, Jack," she replied with a knowing smile. Looks like you're doing some spring cleaning." Danny stormed off to her car, screaming threats and obscenities that would make a sailor blush. As she peeled out of the driveway, I couldn't help but smile. She thought this was the end of her problems. She had no idea this was just the beginning. Hash. Chapter 2. Gathering Intelligence. The Red Lantern was the kind of dive bar that attracted two types of people: those who wanted to drink away their problems, and those who wanted to hear about everyone else's problems. I fell into the second category that particular Tuesday evening. "Jack Reardon, as I live and breathe," Big Mike called out as I walked through the door. Mike O'Sullivan was my oldest friend in Stillwater, a mountain of a man who ran the local construction crew and had the loyalty of a golden retriever. "Heard you finally grew a pair." "News travels fast," I said, sliding onto the bar stool next to him. "Whiskey, neat," I told the bartender. "Faster than you think," Mike replied, lowering his voice. "Danny's been making the rounds, trying to drum up sympathy, telling anyone who'll listen that you've lost your mind." I took a sip of whiskey, letting it burn away the last of my doubts. "What's the general consensus?" "Split down the middle," Mike admitted. "Half the town thinks you're having a midlife crisis. The other half is wondering what took you so long." That's when Mrs. Rose appeared at my elbow like a silver-haired ninja. For a woman in her 70s, she moved with surprising stealth. "Jack, honey," she said, settling onto the stool on my other side, "I think we need to talk." Mrs. Rose wasn't just the neighborhood busybody. She was the unofficial intelligence network for all of Stillwater. If information was currency, she'd be richer than Jeff Bezos. "I've been watching that wife of yours for months," she continued, pulling out her smartphone. "At my age, you learn to document everything. Memory isn't what it used to be." She showed me the screen and my jaw nearly hit the bar. Photo after photo of Danny sneaking into various houses around town. Timestamps, dates, even GPS coordinates. "How did you—" "Ring doorbell cameras," she said with a wink. "Amazing what people will share in the neighborhood watch group chat when they think it's just harmless gossip." Mike leaned over to look at the photos and whistled low. "Jesus, Jack, she really was busy." "This is just the beginning," Mrs. Rose said, scrolling through more images. "I've got videos, text message screenshots that Lisa accidentally sent to the wrong group chat, even some interesting financial records from when Danny thought she was being clever about hiding money." I stared at the elderly woman with new respect. "Why are you helping me?" Her expression hardened. "Because I was married to a cheater for 30 years before I got smart. I know what it's like to be made a fool of, and I know what it's like when the whole town knows your business before you do. Nobody deserves that." She pulled out a manila envelope thick with papers. "Everything you need to know about your wife's extracurricular activities. Names, dates, places, and some very interesting financial irregularities at her real estate office." I opened the envelope and began reading. The first document was a printout of text messages between Danny and someone named Vince. The content made my stomach turn, but it also filled me with a cold, calculating rage. "Vince called her," Mrs. Rose explained. "House flipper from the next town over, drives that ridiculous muscle car, thinks he's God's gift to women. He's been her main project for about 8 months now." The texts were explicit, detailed, and absolutely damning. But more than that, they revealed something I hadn't expected. Danny and her friends had been planning this humiliation for months. They'd been documenting my reactions, making bets about how long I'd stay clueless, even discussing ways to push me further. "They were planning to drive me to a breakdown," I said, reading one particularly cruel exchange. "They wanted to see how far they could push before I snapped." "Looks like they succeeded," Mike said grimly. "Just not in the way they expected." I closed the envelope and looked at Mrs. Rose. "What do you want in return for this?" She smiled, and for a moment I saw the young woman she must have been decades ago. Beautiful, fierce, and dangerous when crossed. "I want front row seats when you burn their world down." The next morning, I started my campaign. First stop, Danny's real estate office. I didn't go inside. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I parked across the street and watched. Within an hour, I'd seen Vince's distinctive black Charger pull into the lot. He went inside, stayed for 20 minutes, and came out adjusting his belt. I followed him to his house on the outskirts of town. It was a modest place, probably one of his own flips that he'd kept for himself. The Charger was parked in the driveway like a monument to his ego. I'd brought a key with me. Not to his house. I wasn't interested in breaking and entering. But that beautiful car of his? That was parked on a public street. And keys have so many uses beyond opening locks. The scratch I left along the driver's side was deep enough to reach the metal, but not deep enough to be considered vandalism. Just the kind of thing that could happen when someone parks too close to a thorny hedge. I left a note under his windshield wiper. "Nice ride. Shame about the owner." Then I went home and waited. It didn't take long. My phone rang at 2:17 p.m. Danny's number. "What the hell did you do to Vince's car?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied calmly. "I've been home all day working on my own car. Ask Mrs. Rose. She's been watching me through her kitchen window." "Don't play games with me, Jack. He's furious, and he thinks what, Danny? That your husband might be upset about you screwing around? Imagine that." The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to destroy you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You have no idea what you've started." I hung up and smiled. She was right about one thing. I had no idea what I'd started. But I was looking forward to finding out. Chapter 3, The Festival Gambit. The annual Stillwater Harvest Festival was the social event of the year, the kind of small-town gathering where everyone came to see and be seen. It was also the perfect venue for what I had planned. I'd spent the past week preparing with Mrs. Rose and Big Mike as my willing accomplices. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Give the people of Stillwater exactly what they loved most. Gossip, but serve it up in a way they'd never forget. "You sure about this, Jack?" Big Mike asked as we set up the technical difficulties that would make my plan possible. "Once you do this, there's no going back." I looked across the town square at the festival setup. Families were arriving with their children, vendors were hawking everything from kettle corn to handmade crafts, and the main stage was being prepared for the evening's entertainment. In a few hours, this peaceful scene would become ground zero for Danny's public humiliation. "She wanted to play games," I said, connecting the final cable. "Let's play." Mrs. Rose appeared at my elbow, dressed in her festival finest and carrying a tablet. "Everything's ready on my end," she said with a conspiratorial grin. "I've got the whole neighborhood watch group standing by, plus half the PTA and 3/4 of the church ladies' auxiliary. When this goes live, it's going to spread faster than wildfire." The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. Danny had been careless with her cloud storage, using the same password for everything. Our wedding anniversary of all things. Her photos, videos, and text messages were all automatically backed up, including some very intimate content she'd been sharing with her various lovers. I wasn't going to release anything truly explicit, I wasn't that kind of man, but the text messages, the selfies she'd been sending, the voice memos where she and Lisa mocked me and planned their campaign of psychological torture, those were fair game. The festival was in full swing by the time Danny arrived. She'd dressed to impress in a designer sundress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Lisa and Tara flanked her like bodyguards, all three of them scanning the crowd with the wariness of deer sensing a hunter. They needn't have worried. I was nowhere to be seen. At least not obviously. I was working the sound booth, having volunteered to help with the technical aspects of the evening's entertainment. Amazing how invisible a man becomes when he's wearing a work shirt and carrying a clipboard. The evening's program began with the usual small-town fare. The mayor's welcome speech, a performance by the high school choir, and a presentation by the local historical society. The crowd was relaxed, enjoying the perfect September weather and the sense of community that made Stillwater special. That's when I made my move. The main screen, which had been displaying photos from previous festivals, suddenly went black. A murmur ran through the crowd as people wondered if there was a technical problem. Then Danny's face appeared on the screen, not in person, but in a selfie she'd taken in our bedroom. She was wearing lingerie I'd never seen before, making a pouty face at the camera. The timestamp showed it had been taken 3 weeks ago, while I was at work. The murmur became a gasp, then excited whispers as people recognized her. But that was just the beginning. The next image was a screenshot of a text conversation between Danny and Vince. Nothing explicit, but clearly intimate. Then another with Pete, the town councilman. Then Dr. Sam, the local dentist. Then 2 other men I didn't even recognize. But the real bombshell was the audio file that began playing through the festival's sound system, a voice memo Danny had sent to Lisa just 2 days earlier. "God, Jack is such a pathetic loser," Danny's voice rang out across the town square, crystal clear through the professional-grade speakers. "You should see how he mopes around the house. I swear, sometimes I think about just telling him everything just to watch him cry." Lisa's voice joined in. "Why don't you just divorce him and take half his stuff?" "Because this is more fun," Danny replied. "Besides, he's too weak to leave and too stupid to figure out what's really going on. I can keep this up for years." The crowd had gone completely silent. Hundreds of people stood frozen, staring at the screen as my wife's voice continued to detail her affairs, mock my character, and reveal the depth of her contempt for our marriage. I found Danny in the crowd. Her face had gone white, then red, then white again. She was looking around frantically, trying to figure out where the audio was coming from and how to stop it. But the best part was yet to come. The final audio clip was from just that morning, a conversation between Danny, Lisa, and Tara as they prepared for the festival. "Do you think Jack will cause a scene?" Tara asked. "Please," Danny scoffed. "The man doesn't have the balls to order pizza without apologizing to the delivery guy. He's not going to cause a scene." "What if he tries to confront Vince?" Lisa wondered. "Then Vince will kick his A, and we'll have it all on video," Danny replied with a laugh. "Either way, we win." The audio cut off, leaving the festival in complete silence. Then, slowly, the murmuring began. Whispers became conversations, conversations became arguments, and arguments became the kind of chaos that would be talked about in Stillwater for decades. I watched from the sound booth as Danny tried to flee, but she was surrounded by people, some sympathetic, but most just hungry for more details. Pete's wife had appeared from somewhere and was screaming at her husband in front of half the town. Dr. Sam was trying to slink away, but was cornered by a group of his patients' wives. And Vince? Vince was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, when faced with public humiliation, the great lover turned out to be as cowardly as everyone else. Mrs. Rose appeared at my side, her eyes twinkling with delight. "Well," she said, "that was better than cable television." I began packing up the equipment, my part in the evening's entertainment complete. As I worked, I could hear fragments of conversation from the crowd. "I always suspected. Poor Jack, how humiliating. Did you see Pete's wife? I thought she was going to eliminate someone. 5 different men? In our town?" By the time I finished packing up, the crowd had largely dispersed. The festival was effectively over, though it was only 8 o'clock. Danny and her friends had vanished, probably to plan their counterattack. I drove home through the quiet streets of Stillwater, past houses where I knew the phones were ringing and the gossip was flowing like water. By morning, every person in town would know exactly what kind of woman I'd been married to. But, as satisfying as the evening had been, I knew it was just the opening move. Danny had declared war on me months ago. She'd just been too arrogant to realize I might eventually fight back. Now, she knew. And if she thought tonight was humiliating, she had no idea what I had planned for the encore. Chapter 4. The Counterattack. The construction site was perfect for what I had in mind. Isolated, dark, and full of equipment that could be very dangerous if someone wasn't careful. It was also where I'd told Vince to meet me if he wanted to settle this like men. I'd sent the message from an untraceable number, making it sound like I was ready to fight for my wife's honor. The kind of macho BS that would appeal to someone like him. What I was really planning was a lesson in humility. Big Mike crouched behind a pile of concrete blocks, trying not to laugh. "You sure this is going to work?" "Trust me," I whispered back. "Guys like Vince are predictable. He thinks he's coming here to knock up the weak husband. Instead, he's going to get a reality check." We didn't have to wait long. Vince's Charger rumbled into the construction site at exactly 10 p.m., its headlights cutting through the darkness. He parked near the trailer that served as the site office and got out, looking around cautiously. He was bigger than I'd expected, probably 6'2" and built like someone who spent serious time in the gym. But size wasn't everything, and I had advantages he didn't know about. "Jack!" he called out. "I know you're here. Come on out so we can finish this." I stepped out from behind the trailer, making sure to stay in the shadows. "I'm here, Vince. Thanks for coming." He strutted toward me, all confidence and swagger. "Look, man, I don't want to hurt you, but you can't go around messing with people's property. That scratch on my car is going to cost $800 to fix." "That's unfortunate," I said calmly, "but not as unfortunate as what's going to happen to your reputation when everyone finds out you're sleeping with a married woman." He laughed, a sound full of contempt. "Everyone already knows, thanks to your little stunt at the festival. And you know what? Nobody cares. Danny's a grown woman, and she can make her own choices. You're right, I agreed. She can, and so can I. That's when Big Mike stepped out of the shadows behind him, holding a length of rope. Vince spun around, suddenly realizing he wasn't dealing with just one angry husband. What the hell? He never finished the sentence. I'd positioned a portable toilet at the edge of a shallow excavation pit, and when Vince turned to face Mike, he backed right into it. The door swung shut, and Mike quickly tied it closed with the rope. "Let me out of here!" Vince screamed, pounding on the plastic walls. "This is abduction!" "Relax," I called out. "It's just a temporary timeout. Time to think about your life choices." What happened next was the most satisfying part of the evening. Big Mike fired up the excavator and carefully lifted the portable toilet, with Vince still inside, and deposited it in the pit. It wasn't deep enough to be dangerous, maybe 4 feet, but it was deep enough to make climbing out impossible. Vince's screaming intensified, along with some very creative profanity. But the beauty of construction sites is that they're located away from residential areas, specifically so the noise won't bother anyone. "Here's the thing, Vince," I said, sitting on the edge of the pit like it was a park bench. "I know all about you. Mrs. Rose did some research. You're married, aren't you? Wife named Sandra, 2 kids in middle school. They live in Bangor, think you're working late on house flips." The screaming stopped. "That's right," I continued. "Turns out you're not just a homewrecker. You're a hypocrite. How do you think Sandra would feel if she knew you were spending your evenings with other men's wives?" "You don't know anything," Vince said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "I know you're 3 months behind on your truck payments," I replied. "I know you've been using money from your house flipping business to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners with your girlfriends. I know Sandra thinks you're working extra hours to save for your daughter's college fund." The portable toilet had gone completely quiet. "I also know that you've been bragging to your buddies about your conquests," I added. "Mrs. Rose has some very interesting recordings from the Red Lantern. Apparently, you like to kiss and tell." I stood up and dusted off my jeans. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop seeing my wife. You're going to leave Stillwater and never come back. And if I hear that you've been talking about tonight or about Danny or about anything that happened here, those recordings are going to find their way to Sandra." "And if I don't?" Vince asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then your wife finds out what kind of man she married, your kids find out what kind of father they have, and your business partners find out what you've been doing with their money." Big Mike fired up the excavator again and lifted the portable toilet out of the pit, setting it down gently on level ground. He untied the rope and stepped back. Vince emerged slowly, his clothes disheveled and his ego thoroughly deflated. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "You're not the man I expected," he said. "No," I agreed. "I'm not, and that's been everyone's mistake." He walked back to his car without another word. The Charger's engine started with its usual roar, but somehow it sounded less impressive than before. As he drove away, I noticed he was careful to observe the speed limit. "Think he'll stay away?" Big Mike asked. "Oh, he'll stay away," I said confidently. "Men like Vince are bullies, and bullies are cowards at heart. He won't risk losing everything for a woman who was just using him anyway." We cleaned up the site and headed back to town. As we drove through the quiet streets of Stillwater, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. 2 down, several to go. But the night wasn't over yet. I had one more stop to make, and this one was going to be the most important of all. ##. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. The Red Lantern was packed for a Tuesday night, which told me everything I needed to know about how the gossip was spreading through Stillwater. Everyone wanted to be where the action was, and after the festival incident, I had become the most interesting man in town. I walked through the door to a mixture of applause, nervous laughter, and whispered conversations. Some people seemed to think I was a hero for exposing my cheating wife. Others clearly thought I'd gone too far, but everyone wanted to know what I was going to do next. "Jack," Big Mike called out from the bar. "Your usual?" "Make it a double," I said, settling onto my regular stool. "It's been a long day." That's when I saw her. Danny sat in a corner booth looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was smeared, and her hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it for hours. She was alone. Lisa and Tara were nowhere to be seen, which meant her support network was already crumbling. Fair-weather friends have a tendency to disappear when the weather turns stormy. Our eyes met across the crowded bar, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Not fear of physical damage. I'd never raised a hand to her in 22 years of marriage, but fear of what else I might be capable of. She stood up and walked over to me, moving carefully like someone walking through a minefield. "Jack," she said quietly, "we need to talk." "No," I replied, not turning to face her. "We really don't. Please. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but this has gone far enough. People are starting to— Starting to what?" I interrupted, finally turning to look at her. "Starting to see you for what you really are? Starting to realize that the perfect wife and successful businesswoman is actually a lying, cheating manipulator? Starting to question what else you might have lied about?" Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and opened the folder Mrs. Rose had helped me compile. Bank statements, credit card records, business documents, all perfectly legal to access since we were still technically married. "I mean the $15,000 you've been skimming from your real estate commissions," I said loud enough for several nearby patrons to hear. "I mean the fake business expenses you've been claiming on our taxes. I mean the second mortgage you took out on the house without telling me." The conversations around us had stopped. Everyone was listening now, and Danny knew it. "You can't prove any of that," she whispered. "Can't I?" I asked, scrolling through the documents. "Mrs. Patterson, you're here tonight, aren't you?" An elderly woman at a nearby table raised her hand tentatively. "Didn't Danny tell you that your house sold for $210,000? I continued. "Yes," Mrs. Patterson replied, looking confused. "According to the county records, it actually sold for $225,000. Danny pocketed the difference and told you the buyers had negotiated a lower price." The silence in the bar was deafening. Mrs. Patterson's face went through several expressions before settling on fury. "You stole from me?" she asked Danny in a voice that could have frozen fire. "It's not what it sounds like," Danny said desperately. "There were additional fees, closing costs." "Bees," I said calmly. "You've been running this scam for at least 2 years. Mrs. Rose has documentation of at least 6 other cases where you've done the same thing." That's when Pete, the town councilman, decided to make his presence known. He'd been sitting at the far end of the bar, probably hoping to avoid attention, but now he stood up and walked over. "Jack, I think you've made your point," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "There's no need to air everyone's dirty laundry in public." I looked at him with amusement. "Pete, right? Married to Carol, father of 3, pillar of the community?" His face went red. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Carol might be interested to know where you were last Thursday afternoon when you told her you were at a budget meeting." Pete's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, I could see his wife Carol pushing through the crowd, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. "You were supposed to be at a budget meeting," she said in a voice that could have cut glass. "I called the town hall. They said the meeting was canceled." Pete looked around desperately, seeking an escape route that didn't exist. The crowd had formed a circle around us, and there was nowhere to run. "Carol, honey, I can explain." She slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed through the bar like a bang. "Don't you dare honey me," she snarled. "How long has this been going on?" Pete looked at Danny, silently pleading for help that wasn't coming. My wife was too busy dealing with her own problems to save anyone else. 8 months, Danny said quietly, and I realized she was done protecting anyone but herself. "Maybe 9. Carol slapped Pete again, then turned and walked out of the bar. Pete stumbled after her, his political career effectively over. "Anyone else want to confess?" I asked the crowd. "Dr. Sam, I know you're here somewhere." A man in his 50s tried to slip toward the exit, but Big Mike was blocking the door. Dr. Sam turned around slowly, his face the color of old parchment. "Jack, please," he said. "I have a practice, a reputation." "Had," I corrected. "Past tense. Mrs. Rose has some very interesting photos of you and Danny in your office after hours. I'm sure the dental board would love to see them." Dr. Sam looked like he was going to be sick. He pushed through the crowd and fled the bar, probably to start making phone calls to damage control specialists. I turned back to Danny, who was now completely alone and surrounded by hostile faces. 22 years, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent bar. 22 years I believed in you. 22 years I trusted you. 22 years I defended you when people said you were cold, calculating, selfish. Tears were running down her face now, but I felt no sympathy. Those tears were for herself, not for me or our marriage or the life she'd destroyed. "You want to know the funny thing?" I continued. You were right about me. I was too weak to leave. But you made one crucial mistake. What? She whispered. You assumed weak meant harmless. I stood up and placed a $20 bill on the bar. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the crowd, I give you Danielle Reardon, liar, cheat, thief, and the most pathetic excuse for a human being in the great state of Maine. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Good riddance!" The applause grew louder, more sustained, until the entire bar was giving me a standing ovation. Danny looked around at the hostile faces surrounding her, realized she had no allies left, and ran for the door. The crowd parted to let her through, but not before several people made sure to share their opinions of her character. I walked out of the Red Lantern into the cool Maine night, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life and the woman who had tried to destroy me. Behind me, I could hear the conversations starting up again, the analysis and speculation that would continue for months. Mrs. Rose was waiting by my truck, a satisfied smile on her face. "Well," she said, "that was even better than I expected." "It's not over yet," I said, though I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "She'll try to fight back, probably hire a lawyer, make threats." "Let her try," Mrs. Rose replied. "Half the town saw what she really is tonight. The other half will hear about it by morning. She's finished in Stillwater." As if summoned by our conversation, Danny appeared in the parking lot. She walked toward us with the unsteady gait of someone who had lost everything and was still trying to process it. "Jack," she said when she reached us, "please, I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. 22 years has to count for something." I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But that woman was gone, if she'd ever existed at all. "You're right," I said finally. 22 years does count for something. It counts for 22 years of lies, 22 years of manipulation, 22 years of making me feel like I wasn't good enough for you. I got into my truck and started the engine. "But here's the thing, Danny," I said through the open window. "You always said I was too weak to leave you. You were right, but I was strong enough to make you leave instead." I drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot of the Red Lantern, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation and the consequences of her choices. In my rearview mirror, I could see her getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. Just like our marriage, just like the life we built together, just like the woman I thought I'd married. She was gone, and I was free.